We have a speaker from Hawaii, so it's morning out there. But welcome to our weekly webinar series toward a peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, where we have weekly sessions here looking at from different perspectives on the issue of Korea. And today's meeting is sponsored by the International Association for Peace and Economic Development, IAED, and we are one of the 8 associations under the Universal Peace Federation banner or umbrella. My name is Alan Jessen. I'll be your moderator today for today's session. We have 3 speakers, and one of them is calling in by phone, so we'll work with that, and we'll take some Q&A at the end. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat box. So we're also being live streamed. I guess this is something to note. But our topic for today is the nuclear disarmament on the Korean Peninsula, lessons learned from Pakistani sanctions. And the reason for that topic is that we're very fortunate to have as our first speaker, Senator Larry Pressler, who served as a US Senator from South Dakota from 1979 to 1997, during which time he was an energetic advocate for nuclear non-proliferation. Senator Pressler served as chairman of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committees. He was the first Vietnam veteran elected to the US Senate. So thank you, Senator, for serving. As chairman of the US Senate Arms Control Subcommittee, he advocated the now famous 1985 Pressler Amendment, where aid and military sales to Pakistan were blocked, including a consignment of F-16 fighter aircraft. This really changed the tenor of the United States relations with Pakistan and India forever. Senator Pressler is a graduate of the Harvard Law School and previously a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University. So, Larry, Senator Pressler, we can't see you, but we're open to hearing your views from your great experience serving in our U.S. Senate. So please, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate this chance to speak with you. I'm looking for a room here that doesn't have any noise. And let me see. Oh, I guess there's not going to be one. So I'll just speak from out here. Yes, we tried to keep nuclear arms out of the Indian subcontinent with the Pressler Amendment. And we didn't succeed, obviously, because both India and Pakistan have got nuclear weapons today. So we've been on the losing side of nuclear proliferation, and now almost every country wants to have a nuclear weapon or be aligned with one because they feel nobody will talk to them unless they do. I guess North Korea is an example of that. The importance the president of North Korea gets is from having a nuclear weapon, unfortunately. So that's the unfortunate situation we're in. However, I hope we don't proliferate any more nuclear weapons in the Korean Peninsula. Of course, they say, well, South Korea's got the United States to back them up, and they've got an unlimited number of nuclear weapons. That's not necessarily true all the time, but it's a very serious stalemate that we're in. So North Korea apparently has a nuclear weapon, and South Korea is afraid of them. So we need to have as many projects to lessen tensions as we can. And I believe there's a Operation Sunrise or something like that is advocated by some for closer relationships between North Korea and South Korea. It would be great if we could break that stalemate and we could move towards one Korea with free elections. Maybe that's asking too much, but we have to be very careful that we don't have a nuclear incident on the Korean Peninsula, which is in some ways equally dangerous as was the India-Pakistan situation on that subcontinent. So I guess we'll just continue the exchanges. If we could get more missionaries and religious people in there, that would be nice. Although I know that the Koreans don't like proselytization from outside, but that might lessen tensions by getting more missionaries into North Korea and vice versa. So those are just some general thoughts that I have, but I don't have any immediate solution. We have nuclear weapons on the peninsula, and I don't see them going away soon, unfortunately. So if anybody has a question, I'll be glad to.
Yeah, let me ask a question, Senator. You recently wrote a book called Neighbor in Arms, and
yes.
it tells the story of of your work in Korea, or I'm sorry, in Pakistan and India to put a halt to it or limit the proliferation of weapons. And one of the credits on the back cover was Mr. Kaushik Basu, the former chief economic advisor of the government of India. And he said this, he said, while the proposed economic sanctions in the amendment were never fully tested, its lessons as a template for economic sanctions remain with us. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on what he was referring to when he said this, the sanctions, and you were part of drafting those sanctions, I believe. But they were never fully tested, but they serve as a lesson, a template for economic sanctions today. So do you have any, if you're from your experience there, we're asking you to think about how
yes.
those sanctions.
Well, one thing to remember on the India-Pakistan nuclear weapons question is that our Pentagon, American policymakers, became very dependent on Pakistan for help. They thought in fighting different elements in Afghanistan and throughout that region. And so the various administrations in the background in the Pentagon have been favorable to Pakistan. And this has made any progress very difficult. So the United States government was divided. We ourselves are proliferators. Our Pentagon wanted to give Pakistan more nuclear weapons or clearance to have more, so Pakistan would help us out in the various ground wars we have over there.
Okay. Anything else to share about that in terms of the how that might apply to North Korea?
Well, in this way, and that there are other foreign policy considerations. Of course, we're a close ally of South Korea, but our presidents, President Trump, for example, tried very hard to get closer to the president of North Korea. I think it's part of the policy of the U.S. government to be close to both Koreas, and it's kind of hard to do. But I hope that there's a lot of dialogue in the North and South, and sunrise type resolutions, an exchange of missionaries and of educators. I think that would be a very, very positive thing, because the Korean Peninsula is very dangerous with nuclear weapons on both sides, essentially.
Mm-hmm. I have a question, and this I may ask this to the other speakers as well, but I was reading recently about some comments about the German unification, and you were a senator at that time, I believe, and this person said that they attributed a lot of success to the fact that conservatives and German parties could come together to agree on the policy of Ostpolitik, so that the East could feel secure in dealing with the West without fear of constant policy flip-flops. So do you have any thoughts on whether this is an accurate conclusion, and do you think it could be applied in the same to the case of North Korea? Could we think about maybe creating a Nordpolitik, so that might convince Chairman Kim that he could trust the South?
Yes, well, this is the whole thing. Of course, can they trust the United States to have a consistent policy? I think our policies on the Korean Peninsula have been more consistent, although it felt in the India-Pakistan thing that we kept reversing ourselves because we had this dilemma. We wanted to pass the Pressler Amendment, have sanctions against Pakistan, but on the other hand, we wanted Pakistan to help us in our various ground wars in Afghanistan and in neighboring countries. So the United States government was sometimes thought to be an unreliable partner, but I think we should continue our friendship with South Korea. We should do as President Trump did, to try to talk to the president of North Korea, and try to work for. The ideal goal would be to have one Korea and with free elections, and I don't know if that will ever happen in my lifetime.
Right. Okay. Well, do you have anything else you want to share at this point, or shall I?
No, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, hang on though. Okay, I'm going to let our next speaker come up, and you may have some might stimulate something else later on. Okay, so
okay.
Thank you. But so then I'd like to welcome our second speaker, and we're very fortunate to have Mr. Ralph Kosa with us. And Mr. Kosa is the former president and Worldwide Support for Development, WSD chair of the Honda Chair in Peace Studies at the Pacific Forum. He's also a founding member of the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia Pacific, CSCAP, I believe, and chairs its study group aimed at halting the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in the Asia Pacific. He serves on a number of Asia-oriented institute boards and is a frequent contributor to regional newspapers and journals. Mr. Kosa is a military, political affairs, and national security specialist with over 50 years of experience in formulating, articulating, and implementing U.S. security policy in the Asia-Pacific, Near East, South Asia regions. Mr. Kosa served in the U.S. Air Force from 1966 to 93. Thank you, sir, for your service. Achieving the rank of colonel and last serving as special assistant to the commander of the U.S. Pacific. So, Mr. Kosa, the floor is yours to share some comments, and we'll.
Well, thank you, Alan, and thanks to the senator. It's a great honor to be on the same program with him. I think the senator, in his comments and in his dream solution, puts his finger on the real problem on the Korean Peninsula and on the reason why we haven't had the kind of cooperation that we've been looking for. All of the parties on the Korean Peninsula share one near-term objective, and that near-term objective is to not have a war on the Korean Peninsula. The South and the U.S., most people would believe, would prevail in such a war, but the cost would be preposterous. I mean, it would be very dramatic for the South. 25 million people within South Korea live within artillery range of the DMZ. Even if the North Koreans didn't use nukes, it would be a catastrophe. At the end of the day, a war would probably end the North Korean regime, and obviously they don't want that. China, Russia, Japan, et cetera, nobody wants to see a war in their neighborhood. So we have that near-term objective. Everyone short of North Korea also has the objective of seeing a denuclearized Korean Peninsula. It's true, South Korea enjoys the US nuclear umbrella, but also when you take polls in South Korea, anywhere from 70 to 80% of the people support nuclear weapons, think they ought to have their own, and certainly if they lost faith in the US extended deterrence, they would move in that direction. So that's why it's very important that the US provide its security umbrella to South Korea, which has a nuclear dimension. On the flip side of that, neither Russia nor China are prepared to offer that kind of security assurance to North Korea. And it's very doubtful North Korea would accept it if they did offer. I've met frequently with the North Koreans. They have absolutely no love for the Chinese, no trust for the Chinese, even though they're heavily dependent on China for their survival today. So it's sort of a strange situation. But the real problem that lacks cooperation is that the senator's dream, which is my dream, which is every South Korean dream, is to see one unified Korean peninsula basically under the political, social, and economic system that exists in the South, democratic elections. That is not the North Korean dream. That is not the Chinese dream. That is not the Russian dream. So as a result, because we have differing long-term objectives on the peninsula, it makes it very hard to cooperate on the short-term objectives. It sort of limits the degree of cooperation. And I think that's the real challenge that we have now. And one of the things we've been trying to work on at Pacific Forum is sort of coming up with a common, acceptable mid to long-term objectives, where each one would sort of set their ideal objectives aside. I think the Chinese would be very happy with keeping North Korea separate from the South, to keep North Korea as a buffer zone. But is there a happy medium where we can all work toward a common long-term goal, some type of Korean federation or confederation where each one keeps its own political systems, but there's a demilitarization as well as a denuclearization. And that's, I think, the dream that we need to work toward, but nobody's proposing that. And that's, I think, where one of the big problems is. So let me stop there, and I'm happy to, again, respond to questions or talk about sanctions, which I think is also part of our objective today.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some more on sanctions, Mr. Kosa, but let's go ahead then with our third speaker. And again, we're very fortunate to have Ms. Purnima Verma with us. She is the founder and CEO of the National U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce, NUICC, a trade organization that promotes bilateral trade between the United States and India through business relationships. The membership of NUICC spans a wide spectrum of industries with direct membership strength of approximately 9,200 people worldwide. She served on President George W. Bush's Presidential Commission and Business Club, providing valuable business policy and trade expertise. She also served as an advisor to the Obama administration on the National Advisory Council of Minority Business Enterprise, and the Wall Street Journal honored Ms. Verma as a Businesswoman of the Year. And I heard also she's done a lot with the United Nations, giving advice and sitting in on many committees. So I know you're qualified to share a few comments with us, Ms. Verma, so please, the floor is yours.
First of all, namaste and good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be among the astute speakers, our Senator Ross and everyone. I am very honored, but I must thank UPF and IAED, because without these intense engagements and conversation and communication, we cannot achieve peace in this world. So my gratitude to these two organizations, and I've been associated with them for decades, and they have not stopped. I've seen that they've gone to a higher and higher and higher level, which is going to result into some positive things globally. I sincerely believe that. One thing before I even begin saying what I have to say, since we are talking about India and we are talking about Pakistan and we are talking about North Korea and South Korea, let me assure you, there is a lot of difference between Pakistan and India. As you have seen since 1947, India has been a peaceful country. Mahatma Gandhi always believed in nonviolence. We didn't use one single bullet to achieve independence. So you have to look at the history and the culture of the country to make an assessment that nuclear weapons are not a threat coming from India at all. Pakistan and India also has similar interests. Economic development, trade, investments, and so forth. The only dispute is Kashmir region, which is a piece of land since 1947. Pakistan claims it's theirs, and it wasn't theirs to begin with. But just a piece of land is causing all this unrest in that region. And I think Quad countries now, and in being inclusive of other countries in the Quad, the neighboring countries of India, I think is a very positive step to address this issue. The only time I've seen India attack Pakistan was not to retaliate, but to answer to them. And we just had our Purnima anniversary yesterday. and a lot of soldiers of ours also lost life. So although I'm a US citizen, I'll say that we, because originally I am from India, but lived in the United States for 45 years. Now, all these meetings like Secretary Blinken had yesterday, they are all very productive. And I feel that for decades, United States alliances with Republic of Korea have been our most important, not only in the Indo-Pacific, but around the world. They're rooted in an ironclad security relationship, America's steadfast commitment to defend both allies in deep and growing economies and trade ties are in the abiding bonds between our people. This is what Secretary Blinken said yesterday. I'm very positive about hearing this because, as I just mentioned, it takes intense engagement, which is exactly what we have been pursuing. But I will ask this question of the senator when he's ready after my talk, is the desired compliances have not been achieved. We have put sanctions, we have done a lot. What more can we do is my question to the senator. Since you're in the heart of Washington and you have a lot of experience, more than any of us, dealing with this, and I'm very impressed and congratulate you on the Pressler report. I read that yesterday and I think that you were right on the dot on identifying things. One thing I would like to say is UN Security Council sanctions have been ineffective in curbing North Korea's nuclear weapon proliferation because North Korea's economy is not open to trade with other countries. I mean, rest of the world. So instead of multilateral sanctions provoking threatening nationalist response from Pyongyang, rather than the desired compliances, an alternative approach is needed. And again, this is a question to the senator. What is that million-dollar question, the alternative approach? We have tried everything. We have tried the sanctions. We have tried the rest of the things. And the United States and Pakistan have generally enjoyed a very close relationship since Pakistan had historically been a supporter of US and foreign policy, especially during China and following the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So with all this, we have given Pakistan loans, debt reliefs. We have really pampered Pakistan a lot, but we still haven't achieved what we set out to do. So what is the next step? I know that United Nations have put sanctions, and those sanctions on North Korea were demands from further nuclear missile tests, demands for North Korea to return to NPT. Besides, North Korea shall suspend all ballistic and missile activities. Besides, North Korea shall abandon its nuclear program, its complete, verifiable, irreversible manner, calls upon North Korea to return to the six-party talks. But heavy weaponry and supply chain and all that spare parts for military, all these were told that we should not support that, and those everything were the right conversations, the right decisions, but the results, we have failed at that. And I would not say completely failed because any dialogue, any communication is important. But with that being said, I would like to say that this is an issue that needs to be not just today's conversation, but it needs to be addressed in many, many more engagements where it comes to United States or India or Pakistan. I think we need to get on the table, and no matter what UN Security Council sanctions have been, they have been ineffective in curbing the Korea's nuclear. When you come to South Korea, what I would like to say is we are always holding a hand or slapping on them on the wrist and saying no nuclear weapons, no nuclear missiles. But South Korea is not the problem. It is the other way around. But I do like, Senator, what you said. I think that can be an effective answer, which is to send more people from South Korea to North Korea, especially the ones that believe in God, believe in peace, believe in human rights. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent. Let's get into sanctions a little bit. And Dr. Voya asked some good questions there. But Mr. Kosa, you were, I'm sure you have some thoughts on the current sanctions and how they're designed. Can they be modified at all if there's any ability from the different parties thinking that the sanctions could be made more effective?
Well, yeah, and I think you phrased the question correctly. Everyone starts off by saying the sanctions have not worked or the sanctions have been ineffective. That sort of implies if there had been no sanctions, the North Koreans wouldn't be even further along with their nuclear program. I mean, the whole purpose of the sanctions was to prevent North Korea from further improving its nuclear weapons capabilities. The sanctions have kept, for a large part, have kept more military equipment out of North Korea. It has also tried to tighten up finances. The North Korean solution to that has been to print its own US $100 bills. That's illegal activity and blackmail and et cetera, and now all the cryptocurrency problems. But this doesn't mean that we shouldn't have been trying to apply pressure on them. The sanctions are aimed first and foremost at trying to prevent a recurrence of the bad behavior, but they're also supposedly, at least UN Security Council sanctions, aimed at sort of sending a message that it's not just South Korea or the US that's concerned with what North Korea is doing, but the international community writ large. The problem, of course, is that when the North Koreans do something so egregious as to get everyone upset, and this now comes down to nuclear weapons tests or ICBM tests, we finally agree with the Russians and Chinese watering down whatever else is being put forth. We finally agree on a set of sanctions to send a unified message. And then 6 months or a year later, the Russians and Chinese stop enforcing it. As a result, the sanctions have become a weapon that North Korea uses to sort of divide the US and China from one another and to create problems. Are there ways that we could selectively lift sanctions? I think they tried to do that in Hanoi during the summit with Trump and Kim. But they couldn't quite agree on exactly what should be lifted and what we would get in return. But I think there are formulas, the so-called snapback formula, where you can release A, B, and C with the understanding that it will automatically go back. The problem, I think, is that the US in many respects lacks faith in the Chinese allowing anything to go back once it's relieved. And we're at a situation today where in the last couple of months, the North Koreans have already had more missile tests, including intermediate range ballistic missile tests, where they're essentially testing to see how badly they can violate current sanctions before we get upset enough to put new sanctions in place. So in response to the North Koreans violating the current sanctions, our solution is to reduce sanctions. Essentially, this is saying, keep up misbehaving and we'll give in and reduce sanctions. So there's sort of a catch-22 there. As long as the North Koreans are violating it, and the Russians and Chinese are saying, well, the best way to respond to their violations is to lift sanctions, that's just a complete non sequitur, and it just sort of undermines the whole point of sanctions in the first place, in my view.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Can I jump in? And
yes,
say that,
Senator Pressler.
Say that I very much agree. One theme of this whole conversation is that sanctions are kind of worthless, but yet we have them and we keep referring to them. For example, President Biden now regarding Ukraine is threatening more sanctions on Russia, but I don't think they won't affect anything. And I'm rather doubtful that most of the sanctions we used in India, Pakistan, or with North and South Korea have much effect, but it gives politicians something to say. I think Hans Morgenthau said you can always threaten sanctions without really much happening, but it sounds tough to the man on the street. So I think we should not rely upon sanctions, and we should not be advocating them so much because they just are not effective.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to go to Ms. Voria a little bit on that point, because you brought up that because North Korea doesn't do a lot of trade, that the sanctions may not be as effective. So from your perspective as a business person, a business leader, what would you suggest, or is there ways that increasing business might bring about some possible movement towards better relationships?
Absolutely. I think deepening relationship and not having a hostile intent towards any country will definitely help this peace process. We discussed deepening trade ties. The good news here is that we are depending on global business right now. The business is no longer local. It has become a global need. And by that, this is the word I just came up with. It's not in the dictionary, global. What happens globally affects local economic development, and that's true for North Korea as well. We do have supply chains like minerals and stuff from North Korea that we also depend on, or the world depends on. There can be improvement, but there has to be a very clear strategy. There has to be a clear discussion. It has to be our top priority to see how Indo-Pacific region can have a strategy for free trade. And also through the in-depth discussion, we must reaffirm our shared goals and achieve complete denuclearization, but at the same time, establishment of lasting peace, whether it's in Korean Peninsula or with India or Pakistan. Like I said, we have a common link here, and trade can play a big role in this. I agree with the senator when he says that the sanctions haven't worked fully. And I do agree with that, because look at Pakistan, how much we have given to them. And we lost all that money. We sent plane load of dollars to Iran. President Obama did in his tenure. And where are we? So global supply chains, I think, is going to be at various levels, close coordination on the Korean Peninsula, because I think business can drive both North and South Korea. And India, I must say, enjoys a very good relationship with South Korea, and they are doing a lot. And the trade has been on the increase with South Korea. But with North Korea, we had a good relationship, but not really in the true sense, I would say. It wasn't very heavy, very engaging, but there was cooperation. And so I think critical minerals, promoting each other's beneficial, future-oriented practical components or cooperation, whatever the global challenges are, whether it's supply chain, economic needs of every country are the same in the world right now. We all need to do business with each other. But at the same time, security cooperation, its scope needs to expand. And yes, what is the magical answer to North Korea denuclearization? I have yet to find out.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Do you have any comments, Ralph, or I have another question here?
Well, I would just say that while I don't disagree with a lot of what's been said, we have to understand that North Korea is sui generis. We haven't mentioned the word COVID at all during this conversation, and of course, in the last 2 years, North Korea has sort of closed its own borders and not even allowed some of the Chinese commerce in because of the paranoia over the disease, while claiming that they haven't had a single case of it, which again is sort of remarkable. It's turned down requests or offers of help, of vaccines, of humanitarian assistance. There are a lot of things that, with normal countries might work. I would not want to be the first missionary to go into North Korea, because we would never see that person again. And that's been very clear. I mean, you can end up in jail or dead for taking a poster off a wall in North Korea. You're certainly going in there and proselytizing is not going to be a way to make friends and influence people. So we have to understand who we're dealing with when we're dealing with North Korea. And it is an extremely unique country, and we have to sort of find solutions that fit their uniqueness.
Okay, I have a question here on the chat. Despite the nuclear ability of North Korea, why is it impossible to make the whole of the peninsula a zone of neutrality, which is guaranteed by Russia, China, and the US and Japan, like Austria's neutrality was guaranteed by the four powers? I think we've lost the senator, by the way, so.
Well, let me start with that anyway, because I think that's a wonderful idea. We've been proposing that in our multilateral meetings in CSCAP, as you mentioned earlier, the Council for Security Cooperation in Asia Pacific, which is one of the few organizations that North Korea actually belongs to, along with the South and the US and Russia and China and others. Even India is a member of CSCAP. But the North Koreans, first of all, the Chinese are not, and Russians are not prepared to provide those kind of security guarantees. But the North Koreans are not prepared to accept them. They sort of believe that their only security is having it themselves, and they sort of envision themselves not as Pakistan. It used to be when we talked with North Koreans, they would say, they would compare themselves to Pakistan and how Pakistan is being treated better than they were. But now when you talk with the North Koreans, they see themselves as the new Soviet Union, as the powerful nuclear weapon state on equal terms with Russia and the US and others, who's prepared to sit down and have denuclearization talks and give up their nuclear weapons as soon as Russia, India, and China and the US are prepared to give up theirs. So it's sort of a different discussion, a different dialogue, which can be very surreal at times. But it'd be wonderful. That would be a great solution, except that at least three of the concerned parties seem to have no interest in even pursuing it.
Okay. Any thoughts, Dr. Voria?
Well, I think Ralph really did a good job on putting it in perspective. So I will reserve my comments at this point.
Okay. By the way, in the chat, if someone's interested, Mr. Kos has posted the connection to the history of the UN sanctions with against North Korea. So a little bit of research there if you're interested on that. What do you all think that Kim Jong-un thinks about the sanctions? I don't know if we can get into his mind at all, but what are his thoughts on that? Do they affect him personally?
Well, I mean, first of all, anyone who claims that they can think like Kim Jong-un should probably be locked up as an extremely dangerous person. So I won't pretend to do that. I can tell you what the North Koreans tell me, and that's that they don't care about sanctions because of their juche policy of self-reliance, and in reality, because the Chinese are keeping them on life support anyway, because the Chinese don't want to see North Korea collapse. The North Koreans sort of believe that China needs them more than they need China, even though China is essential to their survival. And the Chinese keep reinforcing that belief, which makes it very hard. I think the sanctions have certainly hurt North Korea, but they haven't derailed their nuclear program. I can't believe that they haven't slowed it down, obviously, because we've cut off a lot of the trade in military hardware, et cetera, et cetera. But when you see a North Korean parade and they roll out a missile on a transporter erector launcher with 18 wheels as one of these great big monstrous trucks, that are clearly not made in North Korea, you say, well, that didn't come across the border in a diplomatic pouch. That had to have been driven across by the Chinese at some point during the cover of darkness. So the real problem to me is not sanctions. The real problem is enforcement of sanctions. And it's very hard to hold the Chinese accountable when the Chinese reaction, when they show the Chinese a picture of a Chinese ship and a North Korean ship offloading things together. And the Chinese say, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? And most of us believe what we're seeing, but the Chinese still profess that it's not happening, and there's very little recourse. There are, UN committees that have looked at and documented the violations, but then nothing happens from there. So I think it's very frustrating. I don't blame the sanctions for that. I blame the countries that are refusing to enforce them. And these are legally binding sanctions approved by the Security Council, including being approved by a couple of the countries with veto power who have approved them at the Security Council. So that to me is where the real problem lies as far as sanctions are concerned.
On building on your comment there, and then I'll go to you, Purnima, but I read where, of course, there's an uneven history between China and Korea, long-standing, right? Some right. Challenges there. So some analysts have made the point that while certainly, it has been a relief valve for North Korea and kept them on, life support, as you said, but they were saying that it could be an existential danger to North Korea if the reliance on sanctions becomes permanent. Do you think that's a fair concern that Kim Jong-un might have of being too overly reliant on them?
Well, I think the North Koreans are concerned about being overly reliant on the Chinese, even though if you ask the North Koreans that question, they'll claim that they're not reliant on the Chinese. I was at a multilateral meeting a number of years ago where the Chinese were celebrating the PLA role in, quote, liberating the Korean Peninsula. In other words, when they came in and saved North Korea in the 1950s from sure defeat. And the South Koreans sort of put their head, down, and others sort of looked in wonderment. And the North Koreans said, how dare you say that you liberated the Korean Peninsula? We did it. We allowed some Chinese volunteers to come in and help, but you don't deserve any credit for it. We do. So the only one who was truly offended by the Chinese statement was the one that it applied to. This is, again, in dealing with the North Koreans, they have a narrative and they're compelled to believe that narrative. Now, when I talk with North Korean nuclear experts and they say, we are as powerful as Russia or the former Soviet Union, I know two things. One, they can't possibly believe that. And B, they can't possibly say that they don't believe that. And so everything that they do has to be based on that false premise. That's, again, one of the challenges moving forward.
Dr. Voria, do you have?
First of all, I wouldn't want to get into North Korean leader's mind because he's not a leader, he's a dictator. And it's very stressful to get in his mind. I don't want that stress. But saying that, I would say that when you talk to a person and they want good for their country and are reasonable, you can have a conversation with them. But I think in this case, when he sat down with President Trump, everything looked hanky-dory, and it seemed like, we are getting somewhere. He was thrilled at the invitation to the White House, and we really thought, but you look at him, he turns around and changes his mind right after. So you cannot depend on that kind of a leader for any long-term decisions that will work. One thing I know that we have to meet such leaders without preconditions, without provocative actions, and we have to have practical steps towards diplomacy for intent with North Korea, because look who we are dealing with. Again, candid discussion, collaboration, and should be our top priority. Although, just like we see the ads of different products in the United States, if we see them 50 or 1,000 times, then we say, okay, let me get on my phone and just go ahead and buy it. I want to try it. So I think it's just like that. It's a kind of silly analogy, but I would say that we continue to have a dialogue, continue to not retaliate, but yes, we can curtail sanctions and do whatnot, but continuously speaking the same dialogue to them, which is positive, which is cooperating, which should be our in-depth discussion with Kim. And I think reaffirming our shared goals of achieving complete denuclearization and establishment of lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula through the dialogue and diplomacy, we reached consensus in a couple of aspects, and we need to reach consensus, even though we know that they'll be not adhered to, they are not going to, but at least we can try. But I think South Korea can step up to a major role. Yes, they will, as the senator said, and as Ralph also mentioned, it is not easy for sending people to North Korea. Lives will be lost, but many times sacrifices are made for the sake of the global peace. And I'm not an advocate for that, but I feel like if I can help UPF have a strong dialogue with India, with a strong dialogue with Pakistan, I would like to at least help in the Indo-Asia region for achieving some peace. I will feel like I have done my good deed of the day, or I have fulfilled and done something in my life that I can be proud of.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to, we have Cliff Stearns is in our audience, Honorable Cliff Stearns, former member of Congress. And Cliff, if you're out there, I'd like you to unmute yourself and share a few words with us. He was one who invited us to, referred us to Larry Pressler. And I must say, Senator Pressler was on his way. He got caught in traffic in the DC area. And so he ducked into the Metropolitan Club to join with us today. So, but we miss him here. But Congressman Cliff Stearns, would you like to share a few things?
Sure, Alan, thank you very much. And let me applaud you for this program and the very interesting dialogue. I have to sort of smile when I hear your distinguished speakers say that the Chinese volunteers that came into South Korea. So I think we're all aware of the animosity that the North Korea has to the South Korea. And having been there 2 or 3 times and been on the military zone, you're aware of the danger, but you're also aware of the huge amount of support by the South Koreans to unify the country. And I think anyone who's over there, when you speak to the young people, that's all they talk about, because it's so important to the South Koreans. So with that kind of strong feeling, we in the United States should make a special effort to try and support them and try to think of many, many ways to bring the two countries together. And in some ways, I think it's going to happen. I don't know when, but it just cannot continue this way indefinitely, because one country is prospering and the other isn't. And perhaps a change in leadership, like the change in leadership from Mao Zedong leaving China when he died, and then you had the rapprochement between China and the United States and Nixon visiting and Kissinger visiting China. There could be that kind of approach where the leader in North Korea changes, and by changing, we have an opportunity to establish a new relationship and start trade with North Korea, and eventually exchange students, and that South Korea and North Korea combine into sort of a society that's somewhat like South Korea, but perhaps a little bit different.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. I need to wrap this up there. Thank you all for your participation, Mr. Casa and Dr. Voria. I'd like to bring up Dr. Michael Jenkins to kind of conclude us here as the president of the Universal Peace Federation in America here. So Dr. Jenkins, you have a few words for us? He's in Korea now, as a matter of fact. You're on mute, Dr. Jenkins, but he's been at the World Summit there, so he brings us words from Korea. Can't hear you yet. I think we can hear you now. No. Well, technology is great when it works, that's for sure. Okay.
He's going to call you.
Is he? He's going to call me?
Yeah, he's going to call you locally. I know that's a universal sign.
Okay, okay.
We're working in Korea.
It worked for Senator Pressler, so I guess it'll work for Dr. Jenkins here too. So
Yeah, when you can't get through. It's this is all a workaround, this technology.
But really appreciate your participation. And I had some other questions too. This is a rich subject to deal with. I'm especially interested in the Kaesong industrial complex. I don't hear him yet.
I've got him here.
Oh, go ahead.
Michael, are you able to? Oh, I've got, you're echoing.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm okay now.
Okay, go ahead and speak.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alan. I commend you also on this great program. Ralph, thank you for your great prestigious work with the Pacific Command over the years and Intel. And we really thank also Purnima. And great to see Cliff Stearns. Senator Pressler worked with us for years with the Washington Times. I'm very happy. I'm talking here from Seoul. We just concluded a World Summit with Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Mark Esper, all came in from the United States to Korea. We had generals from the UNC Command, Combined Forces, North Korea, Korean U.S. forces in Korea, and the topic was unification of Korea, and everything that was said here was very, very relevant. Congressman Stearns, also good to see you. And what we saw, the Times had a very good piece on it, on Vice President Pence's speech. You know, America has to be strong, and right now they are going headlong. The North is going headlong with Chinese support to rapidly advance their nuclear armaments and their missile capability. And even though it looks like, oh, there's no dialogue, there's nothing going on, actually 10 times more is going on because America is not pressing for the engagement. The Biden administration, fortunately, has not unraveled these different policies of the Trump administration, so they're still holding. But the reality is personal and direct engagement had really moved the ball forward, and we've got to really help open that door. Our program also had Russian and North Korean and Chinese participation online. That was really a first. And that's because the process of engagement has to go on. That's why we had also our program afterwards with us, Mark Esper, just yesterday for Think Tank 2022. And he was the main speaker. We had General Kim from the South Korean forces, and we had also our panel, General Champeau, from who is the chief of command for the UNC United Nations forces, and also we had great dialogue. And it comes back down to America is the key. America is the key to peace, and we've got to really work in every way to strengthen our nation and tell our senators, congressmen, and representatives we have to hold strong, both in the Ukraine situation and also with our engagement with North Korea. So I want to thank you. The Washington Times is also a co-sponsor of our program here, and the Universal Peace Federation is proud to be part of this International Association for Economic Development. So thank you again, Alan, and to all of you. We're here every Tuesday, by the way, with different experts, and it's really growing in momentum. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. We will
Thank
see
you.
you again.
Okay, take care. Good
Right.
job, Alan.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you, everyone. Thank you, Michael, Senator. Good,
Aloha.
Congressman, good to see you, Eric.
Aloha, aloha.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, aloha. What a wonderful